Hello and welcome to the Understanding Narcissists YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me. In this episode, I want to talk about a narcissist's flexibility or lack thereof within their own life, and particularly within the illusion, and basically with how they adapt in different situations or fail to adapt. This is a foggy area and may be very hard for me to articulate, not least of which because I don't think I really understand it very well. But I think that it is useful enough and may help you to a degree of identifying narcissists at the very least. And I think that alone necessitates why I should talk about it, or at least start talking about it. Just introduce it into the conversation. The thing about flexibility or adaptation in the narcissist case is that, well, let me put it this way. They do both. And so it was kind of hard for me to name this video. I didn't know what to call it because they do both simultaneously. While they're adapting, you also see their lack of flexibility. And I'd like to illustrate that with some examples, if I can think of any good ones. It's startling to see how surprisingly deft they are, skilled in social situations, how well they can manipulate people, just a single person or groups of people, simultaneously and seemingly with very little effort, and how good they are at doing that. They also face a severe limitation that because they don't understand people, because they don't have empathy for people, and they don't feel the same things that other people do, or at least if they do, they don't admit it to themselves. They can't readily connect with them, and therefore can't experience what they are experiencing day to day. They emulate it. They think about it. They model it. It's a cognitive or intellectual game for them, not something that they actually identify with, not something that they actually experience. That kind of goes without saying. What I just claimed was not a definitive proof or anything, but it does, on observation, it kind of it's pretty supportive of that conclusion that that's what's going on, that they really just don't understand people. It's not that they aren't trying. I'm not sure that they're capable of understanding people and feeling what they feel. Similarly, narcissists probably aren't going to be watching this channel. That's fine if they are. I support that. But I'm going to guess that that's not going to happen, at least in droves, because it's not going to appeal to them. They're not going to have the connection. They're not going to understand the words coming out of mouth. It's not going to hold any value because it's not really going to contribute to any narcissistic endeavor, any of the stuff that they need to do. When you notice that dichotomy between narcissists and non-narcissists, they don't really connect with anybody, in my opinion. You can see the difficulties they have in trying to adapt to different environments where most of the world, as far as I can tell, is made up of non-narcissists. So the whole game is they've got to cohort, interact with, manipulate, control, fool everybody else who aren't narcissists. Other narcissists are not particularly useful for them. They can't do anything for them. They can only take away, just like narcissists, most, as far as I can tell, take away from everybody around them. What the difficulty that poses is that as skilled and as smart as they can be, and sometimes if it's just instinctual, for all I know, it's just very instinctual how well they are at fooling people because they have to, because they adapted to that in the first place, and that's what they do. It leaves them sort of stranded on an island because that's all they can do. So if everything is a game of manipulation, there's going to be inherent shortcomings with that because there is no connection, there is no growth, there is no real value to speak of as maybe you and I would think of it. Think of something that's progress. You'll notice that around narcissists, The very things that we think are progress, improvements, successes, are failures to them, are not improvements. It's something that they actively attempt to stop every day of their lives because it's a loss of control. They have to maintain the illusion and expand it. And if there's anything worse than not having control, it's losing control, which is probably their greatest fear and enemy, which they're going to kind of project onto you because they will view it as people trying to hurt them as opposed to them basically succumbing to their own folly, to their own issues and their own problems, which they can't acknowledge. So that's kind of a roundabout way of saying the lack of adaptation, where the very necessity, the ability to adapt to control people, is limited by their own narcissism, by the fact that they have to do so and they can't be their own people. Notice how in some situations they're extremely competent and they fool everybody. And yet on very basic things they look terrible and are completely unaware of it. That's that stark contradiction that really illustrates what's wrong with them and that part of them that is insane, because they are completely unaware of it. Insofar as the illusion is concerned, they do what's good for them and the illusion, but sometimes they don't, and they aren't aware of it. You could attribute to them just not caring because it isn't relevant to the illusion, and that happens. That happens plenty where it's not a problem of theirs because it doesn't really affect how people think of them. The value they get from controlling people. There's not a lot of mileage to be had. And yet, at other times you see opportunities where you'd think they would have acted differently or acted at all, in the case they didn't act, and they completely fall short. They look worse. They look bad from it in that process. And that's where you realize that it's not an efficient machine. It's not a worthwhile effort because they really do themselves in the end anyway. So to get back to the original question of what are their real limits? There are so many circumstances where they're able to seemingly adapt and thrive, at least in the controlling environment, when the concern is control, which is always the concern. They seem to do very well. But because the goal itself is not particularly noble or productive, never really gets them anywhere no matter how good they are at it. It's not really a valuable skill to have. Now, to put it in those terms is a little inaccurate because it's not really a skill, it's an affliction. It is disorder, it is a personality disorder. That's not something they have a choice about. And that's not something they can change at all. But you see just how effective they are in other ways. You wonder, well, why can't they be more effective than they are at control? And that's your guess is as good as mine. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why there's so much breakdown and inefficiency in their own regime on the one hand, when they can be really effective on the other hand. And it's not just what they value. It just seems like they're incapable. They would do it if they could, but they just can't. There are also times when they can be flexible for a brief period, a brief moment, but they can't keep it up. You'll notice that they don't really spend any great time outside of their environment, their controlling environment, usually the household. That's not where they can thrive. Thrive is the wrong word, but I'm going to use it anyway. They can't reinstate their control outside of their controlling environment. They have to be in their environment. It's a very dependent type situation. They have to get back and sort of reaffirm their dominance and their control and feel that expressed, given back to them by the enablers, so they feel secure again. And that's not just the narcissist. That's also what enablers do as well. They have a tendency to be anxious when they are outside of the controlling environment because they're supposed to be in the controlling environment. And if they're not in the controlling environment and sustaining the controlling environment, it's not just insecurity. It's also that they're afraid something bad is going to happen if they're not maintaining and sustaining the narcissist, which is a worthy and justifiable fear, because that is exactly what will happen if they don't. Something bad will happen. They're conditioned to believe that and feel that way because that's what's going to happen. That is the reality. It's sort of a threat hanging over them at all times. And just to conclude this video, which has been sort of a mess of things, but maybe it'll come out okay. Maybe it's all relevant in the end. The adaptation itself is kind of an illusion. In terms of long-term flexibility and adaptation and changing their lives and their environment, it's really dependent upon the enabler, because that's where it all stems from. That's the bedrock. That's how everything is founded, is by the enabler and relies upon the enabler. And so that's where most of the change in the adaptation takes place. It's going to be around whoever is supporting them. And so then the question becomes, well, to what extent can they change around the enabler? Well, the illusion is always going to be in place. The basic things I've outlined many times in the past, over and over, like they're perfect, there's nothing wrong with them, there are no faults, they're just totally, utterly fantastic, and so on. That basic tenet has to be upheld. That has to be the truth. Other stipulations can come into the equation as long as they don't threaten the illusion. The narcissist cannot be held responsible for what they're doing. So as long as that person is enabling in some sense, even if their personality isn't necessarily compatible with the narcissists, because I should probably go into this in a different video, but narcissists can have their own personalities while not being overly narcissistic. There are differences between narcissists, and I don't think it's just because of differences in narcissism. The narcissism is primarily the same, but the personality that the narcissism has, I guess I'm saying it again, grown around, adapted around, it's a different person. And so it can express itself in different ways, even though they're going to behave on the same principles. They can come out in different ways. And that's where that flexibility can come in and differences can emerge between not only different narcissists, but different enablers. And when the narcissist has to change enablers, which I can't even give a rough guess when that has to happen, how often that has to happen on average, I have no idea. I'm going to guess that most narcissists are going to have to find different enablers, though, at some point in their lives and switch, not least of which being when they grow up and they go from a parent to a spouse or a romantic interest or what have you. That has to come into play, and their ability to adapt given the enabler's, how shall I say, disposition, that so long as it doesn't interfere too much with the illusion and the illusion is upheld, and more importantly that the enabler goes out of the way to support the illusion at their own expense, at the enabler's own expense for the narcissist, then it works. I'm not sure that there isn't a whole lot they can adapt to within that realm. As long as they believe it, they're perfectly prospective candidates to being enablers. And the narcissist will stay with them forever, as long as the integrity of that whole situation maintain itself and their illusion is supported. I should say, too, that I think narcissists prefer easy enablers, the people who just readily throw themselves down and do what the narcissist asks at the drop of a hat and are always responsive with them and don't have their own lives. I think they prefer that, but it isn't always the case, and I think that's something the narcissist has to work with. And so therein lies some flexible capacity with what they what they can deal with. And keep in mind that it's not something they're putting up with. They'll act like they're putting up with it, but it's not. It's just leverage for them to control further. And they don't have a choice anyway, because narcissists don't leave and have their pick of enablers and dependent people exactly. They may have a lot of people around them, but they're going to be drawn, not by choice, to a certain person for their own good, for the sake of their own problems and disorder, to support the illusion. Anyway, this is a long-winded video. I hope you liked it. I hope you found value in it. Like it if you do. Share it with somebody you think might benefit from it. Comment in the comment section below about your experiences in this area and what you think a narcissist can adapt to and what they can't, as far as what they can change within their lives to accommodate other people, if you can even call it that. I guess to accommodate what they have to in order to get their supply. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.